Coming up on Chopper's Political Podcast.
I would not have stood under Jeremy Corbyn. I've made that really clear. He's not a Labour MP now, and we love the flag and we're very patriotic, and I think you've got to love the country to serve it.
Welcome back to Chopper's Political Podcast with me, Christopher Hope, GB News' political editor. I bring you weekly the best guests, gossip and stories from our studios here in the heart of Westminster. Later on in the podcast, I'm joined by Labour MP for Dover and Deal, Mike Tapp, one of the party's rising stars elected last July, making his name as he raises concerns about illegal migration. But in the true spirit of this podcast, we always do bring you the best guests, gossip and stories, and even guests. Who better to provide that than a former Tory government Chief Whip, Simon Hart. This week, his book, Ungovernable, The Political Diaries of a Chief Whip, is out. 5 years of diaries of what it's like at the top of the last Tory government or so. I can assure you there are some mouth-opening moments. Simon Hart, welcome to Chopper's Political Podcast. Normally, Chief Whips keep their MPs' secrets secret. Why have you let yours out?
Well, they do, and I tried to deal with that literally on page one of the book, because I think there's a fundamental question that I am trying to ask, which is how the hell we went from unassailable to unelectable.
So unassailable
4.5 years.
Yeah.
So we started December 9th. To start with the exit poll December 2019, finish with the exit poll July 2024. We went from an 81-seat majority to, we all know what the result was last year, and through three very different prime ministers. And we have to confront an uncomfortable truth here, which is, why did that happen? That's not because the election was in July, not in October, or some sort of, easy.
Were you back in that call, by the way? Were you in the room saying, yes, to Rishi, go in July, not go in November?
Yeah, I mean, it was.
You did. You supported it.
Yeah, I am.
Not
absolutely. I will go to my grave supporting that decision and the reasons behind it, by the way. And the idea that if it only had been October or November, life would have been different marginally. We went to a 20-point poll deficit in about the third week of Liz Truss's administration, and thereafter it never changed. It barely went up, it barely went down. It didn't matter what we
made their mind.
It didn't mind what we did, well or badly. The public had decided that the joke had worn a bit thin, and it was somebody else's turn on the carousel.
But you gave up power for 6 months. You could have been in power until last month. Had you not gone early?
The trite answer to that is, look, this was not about our pensions.
It's being in power. It's why your party exists.
We were trying to maximise what chances we had. And the one thing you can be sure about with Rishi Sunak, and you know this as well as I do, is he does not do things, spontaneously. He is very, very thoughtful. He will have considered every bit of evidence, every bit of polling trend, every indicator before reaching that decision. Now, the fact that it ended up in the way they did is possibly a different argument, but we have to, as a party. I've tried to do this respectfully. I've anonymised a lot of the stuff. I've tried not to make life more difficult for people whose lives are already complicated.
We'll come to that in a minute.
I try to make it, I just try to ask these questions. There's another thing, though, Chris, which is just to try and slay this theory that everybody's in politics to sort of get one over on the voters. And, whether it's Labour, whether in my case in Wales, Plaid Cymru, or Conservatives, or whoever the heck it is in office, 99 times out of 100, I found that not to be the case.
People, they're doing their best.
Doing their best to do the right thing.
And
for the right reason.
You see the full 360.
And
you see all the horrors below the borderline.
Like any other workplace. Falling over from time to time. We didn't always get it right. I know for a fact. I've tried the diaries are written the way they are because they were written on the day that it happened. I've not retrospectively
we'll come to
changed
all
of it.
Because you're very honest about it.
Well, if it looks like it was written at 11 o'clock at night after 2 hours in the pub, it probably was. It probably was. But the intention was to impart a sense of frustration, amazement, astonishment.
Well, on that actual point, I think that's proved by the point when you say that Partygate is an old story. I don't think it's resonating with the public.
Yeah, that's what
it bloody well did resonate because it
brought down Boris Johnson. But at the time, I remember we all thought Who doesn't have a glass of wine at the end of a difficult day?
It did feel a bit like that, even from my position because it was like a year after the end of lockdowns and the rest.
And I remember stuff in there too when I was rereading it around the pandemic, at the beginning of the pandemic, and our attitude was slightly the same as we heard of this flu bug somewhere in China. Big deal.
But it's saying that's not really to get Partygate, but it came to symbolise what seemed to be a disrespect towards the public. One rule for them, one rule for us, and that's what brought him down.
And if people want to know why we lost the general election in 2024 in the way that we did, it was because Partygate did for our reputation for integrity, and we can have an argument about whether Liz Truss was right or wrong, but Liz Truss's period did for our reputation for economic competence. Two things that voters look to us to be able to uphold.
I think that is unarguable.
And both were so badly damaged that come the election, as it didn't matter who said what, we were going.
Why not wait until the economic indicators came back? Maybe the boat crossings continue to fall. Immigration, I suppose that would be difficult for you in November, but if you went in October, you'd have avoided that rabbit hole.
I think, I remember having these conversations around those sort of things, and actually we were doing the tax reduction program. We passed the Rwanda legislation, whether people liked it or not, around.
But no one,
and it didn't. I say the economic indicators were quite good. It looked like we were on top of the Rwanda issue. There were all of those things which people had been begging us to do, and still, that poll deficit would not budge.
When he became chief whip, did he give any undertakings of not doing this? There's no deal. There's no contract you sign. It's just doing it.
I mean, I've been writing a diary since 2010.
Have you?
People know. I did that on day one when I was elected. It was meant to be something for the kids in later life. They could see where I'd been for 15 years. So there was no... obviously, there's an expectation of confidentiality around individual cases. And by the way, this has been through a legal process and through the Cabinet Office approval process, which it has to do. So there's an awful lot which isn't in the book. And I say a lot of what's in the book has been anonymised for I think, very good reason. But, I feel really passionately about the fact that if we just sit in this sort of self-imposed respectful silence forever, where it's, not the done thing.
That's what we as chief whips or former chief whips.
Yeah, and or other party people. We can sit forever in our comfortable armchairs and be very, gentlemanly about this and never raise it and we will continue to make the same mistakes. We have got to confront the fact that politics is in a difficult position, whichever party you're in.
This book is a public service. I've got it. It's a public service. It's a future generations of chief whips.
I am nothing if not a hypocrite. I do hold my hands up to that.
Just find out if any MP said, why have you done this? Why are you lifting the stone and looking at all the creepy crawlies in the Tory party crawling around?
This is not about the Conservative Party. This is about politics.
Of course,
It's about politics. But this is not unique to my party by any stretch. And look at the challenges that the current government chief whip is having with some of the issues in the Labour Party.
Monthly, it seems.
This is not an unusual set of circumstances. And yeah, sure,
Human
there
frailty,
are one or two people, and I do respect their view, who just say, I'm not sure. I'm not sure this is the done thing is an expression which is used to be, and I've tried to reflect that. I've tried to sort of be as honourable as I can in those circumstances. But we were knocked out. We're knocked out of the park in July last year, and within just a few minutes. Almost, it felt like a few political minutes after Keir Starmer became Prime Minister, he started encountering exactly the same headwinds as we did. Just as much difficulty with his own colleagues and his own members, and those unbelievably complicated, you couldn't make it up moments. We can fold our arms and remain silent forever.
Yeah.
And if we
lost any friends yet?
And if we do.
Lost any friends yet?
As chief whip, we didn't have many friends to start with. I just hope that this will actually serve a useful purpose as well as
The opening quote on the book is proximity to power deludes some into thinking they wield it. What do you mean by that?
It was I think that's a House of Cards quote. And Michael Dobbs and I used to talk about, and indeed we talked about.
He's the author of House of Cards.
Yeah, or the author creator of House of Cards, and I think it was just a reflection on the fact that in our case, 353 MPs and of the 650 who populate Parliament, there were a range of different people with different solutions, who could basically run the country better than whoever the Prime Minister was at the time. I mean, as I say, Keir is having exactly that experience at the moment. And one of the things which just struck me when I was doing this role is that in the end, there are very few places where power is actually held. There's a lot of people who think they held it. A lot of people would like to hold it. But there's very few people who do hold it. And most of that power is concentrated on number 10. You could say quite reasonably. And it seemed to me, and by the way, I'm a supporter of this, that it seemed to me that absolutely nothing that went on in government ever, however trivial or however serious, ever happened without number 10 being content that it did happen. And above all, which was quite daunting, the whips being able to say to number 10, yes, you have the numbers to do this. Because we had a lot of people would come through my door with some fantastic idea, notion, proposal, solution, but we would run the numbers, and the numbers wouldn't happen.
I'm not sure you lost. You lose one vote. You lost one vote, didn't you?
Unbelievably frustrating.
And what was it on again?
It was on Diana Johnson's amendment on infected blood.
That's right.
And we lost by 4.
By 4. Yes.
And we should.
Your job is not to lose votes.
We should have supported her amendment actually, but it was
too costly.
We got too. Well, we got into the weeds a bit. We got too complicated, and we left it too late. And it makes me start to sort of sweat when you remind me of that, because we had an unbroken record and we never lost another vote after.
That's right.
But it was
You would always tell me, walking out, "I never lost a vote yet." Dropping, you'd say to me, and then you
famous last word. Yeah. But I tell you what, that was okay. What we ended up agreeing to, what Parliament ended up agreeing to, was actually the sort of government position. So we had we didn't even have to have the fight.
Yes,
but we did, and as I said earlier on, though, we didn't get stuff right. We got that. I'm afraid to say, we took our eye off the ball.
The book is a classic, just for the kind of it's very well written. It skips along quickly. You don't get too tied into the weeds. There aren't that many footnotes, thank goodness. It's not delayed by that. It's full of outrageous stories. I mean, just to remind listeners and viewers of one of them, a colleague update. You say one of our Tory MPs has been filmed having sex with a rent boy while taking cocaine, just as a woman, and in contravention of COVID guidelines. Being Britain, it's the lockdown breach the court of the greatest indignation. I mean, I'm lost.
I've tried, by the way, and this is going to sound sort of quite the sort of stuffy thing to say, but I think there's a big difference between trying to say to you, isn't this a laugh? That
I know, I'm going to come to that,
and this being actually more a case of you couldn't make it up. And where I come from on this is it's a case of, bloody hell, what next? And
what next?
And
what next was a colleague rescued from a brothel, a phone call to you at 2 in the morning.
And we used to have, I literally had to almost keep an hour or two of my diary free every day. I don't know how we can describe these things on this channel, but we used to call it the shit happens bit of the diary, because we knew that shit would happen at some stage during the day. So we needed an hour or two in the diary to be able to do it. We literally would keep, and so this is not you and me having a sort of jolly
it is
public school laugh about these things. Actually, it was incredibly serious, and it was incredibly disturbing, and it was incredibly difficult.
So why is it happening? What are MPs just weird people?
No, I think it happens in every workplace.
Really? These are extreme.
I think
things happen.
And that's why we're talking about them. And I think there's a greater level of scrutiny, probably a good thing. But I do. I think that Parliament is 650 individual members of Parliament drawn from society. It's exactly what democracy is intended to be, which is a broad cross-section of people bringing with them all of the talent and frailties of human life. And to that extent, is it so different from a newsroom, or is it so different from a big factory?
Particularly attract risk takers, I think. The behaviours in this book are not, I think, normal behaviours.
Well, and I say, rather to just make it a sort of salacious kiss and tell thing, which, I mean, obviously we could try and make it interesting to get the point across, but I do think that there is, by the way, I've tried to make this point, probably have failed dismally, but I've tried to make the point that we must expect in our parliamentary representatives a degree of eccentricity and unusualness. That's what makes it interesting. It's what makes the the sort of diverse nature of Parliament work. I accept there are some cases where you think, really, and we try to keep a sort of very deadpan, straight face about these things. But I suspect if you work in I compared the Whip's office in this book to a sort of A&E department where people came in, we patched them up, we sent them on their way. And I suspect if you work in a real A&E department, you see stuff every day where you think, wow,
Have you done the audio?
Did you do that?
Have you done the audio book yet?
I've done the audio book. Why they've asked me to do the audiobook, I don't know. I'm not.
I think you sound a bit. You don't sound. You sound. I don't know.
I'm not an actor. Put it that way. But they seem to think that it needs to be.
I've got to clear up some issues here. At one point, you say Kemi Badenoch pops in for a chat about what you call trans stuff. You try, but you can't find a mutually usable wavelength with her. She's in a permanent state of outrage. It must be so tiring. Is she appropriate to be a leader of your party, given her perpetual state of outrage?
I think you need to be in a state of permanent outrage. And I remember Mrs. Thatcher, I think, always saying she...
And the wavelength issue?
Every day she had... For me, I think Kemi must have found me the most annoying person on earth, because the Whip's office was the banker liked to say no. Everybody came and said normally the answer was no, you can't do that because we haven't got time in the calendar or whatever. So if you were a sort of a very energetic Secretary of State who was trying to get to the front of the queue, get your stuff in, the one person who used to really irritate you was the chief whip. We were there saying no. So to be fair to Kemi,
you were the rock of indifference,
and I think she probably found me really annoying. I think she's I think I've said something, and I learnt not to underestimate it.
Yes, no one has.
She's quite a formidable operator, and I think she's just probably. As I say, I was just the sort of like the traffic warden in all of this.
There's lots of chat out there, as you know, about an excerpt in here. She was one of the three women promoted in a reshuffle, along with Michelle Donlan and Lucy Fraser. The PM, Rishi Sunak, said one of them was effing useless. Which one was it?
One of the mistakes I made in this book was to where there were anonymized passages. All I've really done is set a massive number of hairs running, and
the journalist.
I know, and I should have known better. The one thing I'm going to disappoint you.
Not help you.
One thing I'm going to help you a bit by saying it definitely wasn't her.
Wasn't Kemi?
No.
Okay, that's
so I will have to slay that particular rumour, as I have done a few times this week.
Yes, I'm sure you have. I mean, you've had to.
Yeah.
I love Alistair Jack's advice, a former Scottish secretary, about Chinese honey traps of any foreign state. If you think you're punching above your weight, ask yourself why.
That's a classic Alistair.
All of life.
Classic Alistair. Alistair was one of those people who, because he'd been around a long time, he could sort of say stuff that everybody else...
But he's right, of course. Exactly right in saying that. Yeah. Boris Johnson and David Cameron, you never felt close to them. And Cameron too, they were polite, funny, but they were quite distant. Is that an old Etonian thing? I've heard that said about old Etonians, for example, but... Or wasn't
think so. I think it probably, for some prime ministers, it's a pretty lonely place to be.
It's a survival thing.
It was weird that the closest I ever got to Boris was on the day that I resigned. I was never that close to David, although when he came back as foreign secretary, you suddenly did realise what a class operator he was, and he was an outstanding performer.
He loved it being foreign secretary,
and it was just like watching a top class sportsman, he was just very, very good. I remember Grant Shapps saying to me, "Thank God I'd forgotten how good he was."
In
He
terms
was
of
very
getting
good.
close to them, perhaps being a bit distant is how you survive in that game. Because if you're the PM, you know at some point I may have to fire Simon Hart, so I can't get too close to him.
Absolutely, and
Kind of from-
and I think it's a lonely existence in lots of different levels of politics, and I suspect if you have the thick enough skin and you're determined enough to get through the multitude of obstacles and become prime minister of your country, or leader of your party, there's a very, very sort of alpha streak about you which you need.
Yeah, you weren't a big fan of Liz Truss, were you? You thought that members were delusional for appointing her or voting as leader.
I was frustrated at the time. I don't mind admitting that, because I think that we knew, I think we just all felt with Liz that it didn't. The members' parliament had very emphatically expressed a view
Because they worked
delighted as we could, and it was. We were worried, unfortunately, Rishi's predictions came right over that, and it's not a bad human being or anything like that, but I think we just all thought that what we needed at that moment was settle down. Let's get the economy back on. Let's get everything calm again.
Ukraine, COVID.
Yeah, and we'd had that sort of very, very explosive final months of
Boris Johnson, wasn't she?
And what we needed, I thought, just for all of our voters, not necessarily our members, but our voters, to sort of recover their confidence in us, was a period of calm competence, and unfortunately that didn't.
Is it time to stop members choosing your leader at the party?
I don't know whether there's going to be a sort of re-examination. There might be a sort of a different way of doing. One of the things I do believe in all of this is that, and every day when I was in the Whip's office, I would conclude that somewhere in the system there was a fault in the way in which we identify, train, support, mentor candidates, because we were getting some brilliant people, but we were also getting some people who weren't cut out quite for the role, or might have been cut out being an MP not so easy in the sort of progression to a ministerial role. And that wasn't a fault of theirs. I think it was a fault of ours. I think our system didn't support them. And I think there is a gap in the system, in the process, where we can give people more support and more training and help them deal with the unbelievable amount of unpredictable stuff that comes through the door.
Well, it's been great to talk to you, Simon Hart. There is one entry I'm particularly interested in. 24th of May, you had a rather second-rate lunch with Chris Hope, it says here, in Iberica.
Oh, yeah.
But he's on good form, and the paper's quite pro-Boris. I worked at the Telegraph at the time. Was it a dreadful lunch? Do you remember?
It was
quite meaty, wasn't it?
Octopus.
Octopus.
And it was a bit chewy. I just remember that.
But you'd have a lot of lunches with journalists, don't you? Were journalists a way to get lots of...
There was a recurring theme in the book, which I was a bit embarrassed about at the end, which was a number of dinners and lunches I appear to have.
Intelligence gathering.
But it was always good fun, Christopher, irrespective of the octopus.
What's next for the octopus? What's next for Simon Hart?
It's a really
House of Lords.
I do a lot about the honour system in there, and I get quite agitated about the fact that
Big queue for
honours are not a God-given right. If they happen, they happen. If they don't, they don't. And it used to annoy me that people literally thought it was something which you were almost sort of contractually obliged to do. No, and so I don't know, but like a lot of colleagues who left in July 24, job market's tough out there actually at the moment.
Advice for ex-MPs: some are finding it very hard to get work.
Plan your exit on day one of your time in Parliament. Don't leave until the end. Deal with it when you go in. Start planning your exit and what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, when you want to leave, what your pension arrangements are, because it comes very quickly, and it's brutal when it happens. And the telephone doesn't ring off the hook. You don't get festooned with offers of lovely positions on well-paid boards, leverage, like you might have done in the old days. There's a lot of colleagues who haven't worked a day since last July, and it's not a sob story for Tories, and I know there won't be a lot of public sympathy for that, but one of the things that does worry me is the gene pool politics is getting smaller. All of this noise, all of these difficulties just mean that fewer and fewer people want to do this job. And if the gene
great
pool,
privilege is your job, isn't it?
absolutely, if the gene pool gets smaller, it's harder to get the best people into government, and voters will ultimately feel that they've been shortchanged. So it's important we get it right.
Simon Hart, thank you for joining us tonight for a really entertaining chat for the podcast. The book is called Ungovernable, The Political Diaries of a Chief Whip, published by Macmillan. It costs £25 in hardback. It's a great read. I recommend it. Thank you for joining us on Chopper's Political Podcast.
Thank you very much.
Our next guest on Chopper's Political Podcast is Mike Tapp, the newly elected Labour MP for Dover and Deal. Mike, welcome to Chopper's Political Podcast.
Hello.
I can't ever call you newly elected, but I probably can for the first year you're elected. Something happened last week, I thought, Mike Tapp. Sir Keir Starmer kind of came clean about the Labour Party's weaknesses on immigration. He said that there's a sense that of an establishment that it hasn't been listening to people about immigration, and that's deeply felt by working people. Did you think that too?
I've thought that for years. And I was campaigning in Dover and Deal for 2.5 years before the election.
Illegal migration is a big issue.
Right, exactly. It's the front line. This is where initially they were turning up on the beaches on their boats, and of course that's developed into coming into the Western Jetfall while they're processed after being intercepted. So it's felt in Dover, and throughout my whole campaign, I was listening to residents, and to be their member of parliament, I need to understand what matters. And I saw very quickly that this matters to people there. But at the same time, it mattered to me anyway. Being a true patriot who loves this country, I believe that secure borders are fundamental to a nation state. And look, Keir campaigned on that too during the general election, and we talked about secure borders. We've obviously gone a long way to, putting in the legislation to help us achieve that. And I think this letter was just backing up what he believes anyway.
Yes. It was more about legal migration than illegal migration. Let's go on to illegal migration in a second.
Yeah.
I was struck by a part of that letter. He said he met a woman in Oldham. This lady was concerned about young migrant men from Europe committing antisocial behaviour where she lived. She said that he said that in order for her to raise this issue, she had to pull out a box of photos showing her at a wedding she'd been to for Asian neighbours. The point was even to talk about the issue, the permission to talk about the issue, you have to show she wasn't racist.
Yeah.
And that's surely wrong. Isn't it?
I mean, I've been really clear that it's not racist to have valid concerns over border security and knowing who's coming into the country. And there's no doubt that Keir understands that and the party understand that. But at the same time, and I've been really clear...
There is now, so we wouldn't be saying it.
Oh, he's just backing that up. He's saying, this is for important, and we're all singing off the same page here, and I believe we are. But it is also really important to point out that, many migrants who come over contribute to our society and our economy. My dad's just come out of hospital. He was cared for by migrant workers. My granddad was when he was in a care home. My mum worked in the care sector with lots of migrant workers. So let's not forget that value. But at the same time, secure borders are really important, and we're taking it seriously.
And that's where you come on to illegal migration. Mm-hmm. The axing of the Rwanda plan, you support that, even though some would say the deterrent was working anecdotally, with migrants going to Southern Ireland, for example, or staying in northern France until the Tories lost power?
Well, look, 400 crossed in 2018. We had over 130,000 crossing on the Conservatives' watch. When they brought that in, when they introduced the Rwanda plan, it was 80,000, and only 4 went to Rwanda voluntarily.
To prove it was safe.
Now I would say...
prove it was safe.
So my view on a true deterrent is deporting those who shouldn't be here. That's increased by 25%. Yeah, exactly. So I think we're now up to around 18,000, which is a record high. We haven't seen that sort of numbers being deported for over a decade. 19% increase in foreign offenders being deported. And the reason that's happening is because a vet in the Home Office has got those decision makers in. They've got the workers doing their day job, essentially, turning around the processing of the applications so that we can identify quicker who should be here and who shouldn't. And that's why they're being deported. That's a deterrent, because as that cuts through, and it does take time, people will realise you're not going to come and sit in a hotel for 3, 4, 5 years, taking benefits and essentially never being processed, because that's where we were at. That's what we inherited. So having a system that works is really important. But, and I think this is key, how are they coming over? And it's the smuggling gangs that are facilitating that. And they're evil people. We're seeing, kids dying in the Channel, and bringing in the new counter-terror laws will be effective. Now, I've worked against criminal groups with the National Crime Agency, but also in a counter-terror role. So I've been able to use those powers. Yeah. And look, how MI5 work, for example, is they won't wait for a terror attack to happen before they take action. They'll get to them first. And that's what we're looking to do with the smuggling gangs. So we don't wait, we get to them. And often this is where it gets a little complex. You'll have the intelligence to know who these vile criminals are, but you can't act on it because you can't reach the evidential threshold, because these people are good at what they do. But these new powers, which are going through, we've got committee stage starting next week, I think, will enable the Border Security Command, MI5 and the police to disrupt that.
It will have a bearing. The pull towards the country is still quite strong. You mentioned hotels. They get some warm clothes. I mean, phones, and they get stuff when they arrive, don't they? Is that a problem?
Well, look, I was down at WesternJet for 2 weeks ago.
That's in Dover.
In Dover.
That's where they landed.
That's where they're coming for the initial processing. They get a cheap trackie. They're not getting Gucci clothes. No. So we've got to bear that in mind. It is very much the bare minimum.
So is it? Yeah.
There's many coming off the boats with.
Critics say there's a lot to do, that we could be a bit more unwelcoming. We sort of mean.
Well, look,
would that be inhuman in your words?
I think that we of course are not welcoming in general to illegal migration, but when they're humans coming off a boat with fuel burns, we're going to treat them like humans, and then they go into the system, they're processed, and if they shouldn't be here, they're deported. That's what British values are. We're strong, we're firm, but we're also decent. And I think strength without decency is quite weak, really.
You mentioned your military background. You started serving in the intelligence corps.
Yes.
Why did you join the armed forces?
Service. My dad was a lifetime copper, and my mum was a care worker, and I grew up in a family serving, and I wanted to do my bit. I got to the Army Careers Office, and they suggested the Intelligence Corps, and I loved every minute of it, to be honest. 3 operational deployments, all great fun. Iraq and Afghanistan. So Iraq once, Afghanistan twice. And to be honest, Chris, the only reason I left was because I think I deployed on too many operational tours in a very short period of time, because I was in a very small sort of special duties unit, and you could put yourself forward for deployment. So it wasn't in with the brigade turnover that's normal. And after the 3rd tour,
that means every 6 months you
exactly
leave the war zone.
Yeah, and I think it's a year and a half between deployments. That might be wrong. It was a long period.
Cool off, basically.
But I got bored when I was back. I just wanted to get back out there. Got back the 3rd time. I thought I think I'll stay at home now. So I joined the National Crime Agency and then worked in counter-terrorism. So continued.
Became an MP?
Yes, exactly.
Which is unexpected. But yeah, yours been a Labour Party member all your life, I suppose.
Yeah.
We have this war in Ukraine. The PM said he's willing to have UK troops maybe helping with a peace. You support that?
I do. It's good to see Britain leading on this front. Yeah. Of course, it's far too early to say what's going to be necessary and where we're going with these peace talks. We'll see where we go, but it's good to see that willingness is there. But of course, our military it's been cut to the bone by the Conservatives. We're down to 72,000 troops now, smallest since Napoleon days. The defence review, strategic defence review, will be important because it will tell us where to put our troops and our money.
As well as increase the troops too.
Exactly, because the last defence review actually told us that that conventional warfare in Europe, for example, is no longer a threat, and we've seen that that's simply not the case.
Well, it was cyber. I remember vividly. I think 4 months later, Ukraine happened. Yes. I mean, we were writing a lot about cyber, as that was the new battleground, of course. Yeah. How big should the army be in your world?
It's difficult to say. This is why the defence review is so important, because although that conventional warfare threat has increased, so has the drone threat, so has the cyber threat, so has the intelligence threat in terms of, I mean, look what happened in Salisbury, you know. So there's a lot of dynamic, difficult defence issues to look at, which that review will.
But it's a numbers game, isn't it? 70,000. Do you want to see 90,000, 80,000? I mean,
it depends what's needed for a brigade turnaround and an effective peacekeeping force.
Yes. You mentioned being patriotic. Now, I found that interesting. When I was covering Labour through the Corbyn years, that became an issue, I think, for feeling that the top of the party wasn't patriotic, loved his country. How did you find that?
Long gone, long of those days
but
gone.
It did feel that way, didn't it?
It did. And
you
look,
remember then?
I would not have stood under Jeremy Corbyn. I've made that really clear. He's not a Labour MP now, and we love the flag and we're very patriotic, and I think you've got to love the country to serve it.
Have you ever had any problems in the party with your views on migration or patriotism?
No, not at all. My colleagues support that and share it, actually.
Yeah.
I was brought up on British values, you know, through my dad. My granddad was he flew Catalina boats taking out Nazis in the Atlantic. He was then a Coleman's mustard salesman, you know, the best of British.
Absolutely.
He sort of discreetly drummed that into us, really. So there's no question that serving the country means you need to love it.
Yeah. And what's your plans for your political career?
To serve
Prime
the
Minister?
people.
Well, I may as well ask you.
That's a lovely promotion, Chris. No, serve the people of Dover and Deal, do my very best, keep banging that drum on immigration, security, defence, policing as well. Really important stuff.
And we'll see more of you on GB News, I hope.
Absolutely, love it.
Mike Tapp, thank you for joining us today on Chopper's Political Podcast.
Cheers,
Great
Chris.
to have you on. Thank you. And thank you for listening to this, wherever you are listening to this podcast or watching it. I tweeted Christopher Hope on X. What's your Twitter account?
Mike Tapp tweets.
There we go, Mike Tapp tweets. You can email me also, chopper@gbnews.uk. If you enjoyed this podcast, please do tell your friends. If you really enjoyed it, like Mike Tapp has, please leave a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify to help other people find the show. Thank you earlier to Simon Hart. Thank you to Mike Tapp for coming on. So thank you to the great team of GB News colleagues behind the podcast, Mick Booker and Jeff Marsh back at HQ, Racky Nunes and George McMillan in the studio with me now. But most importantly of all, thank you to you again for listening. If you want more Chopper in your life, and who doesn't, catch me during the week on GB News and at midday on Wednesdays, where I bring you the best analysis from PMQs. And keep up to date with our best reporting on our website, gbnews.com. Until next time, though, from me and Mike Tapp, cheerio!